The gravity field fluctuation alarm should have been silent at 0347 hours. I know because I've been monitoring Sector 12's artificial gravity systems for 3 years, and the overnight maintenance window runs clean. No adjustments, no variations, just steady 9.8 meters per second squared, pulling everything toward the reinforced deck plates beneath our feet. But there it was, a soft chime from Console 7, displaying a brief anomaly reading that vanished before I could capture it. I'm Avon Kors, lead gravity systems engineer for residential sectors 10 through 15. 50,000 people sleep in the apartment complexes and commercial towers above my head, their lives depending on the network of massive rotating cylinders and magnetic field generators humming in the chamber behind me. The artificial gravity we maintain isn't just comfort, it's structural necessity. Without consistent downward force, the buildings above would tear themselves apart from internal stress differentials. The console chimed again. This time I was ready, fingers hovering over the data capture controls. The readout showed normal parameters: field strength steady, rotation synchronization optimal, magnetic containment within acceptable variance. But something had triggered the fluctuation sensor twice in 4 minutes. I pulled up the sensor logs, scrolling through timestamp after timestamp of perfect stability. Nothing. Not even a microsecond blip in the gravity field strength. Either my equipment was malfunctioning, or something was happening that the primary sensors couldn't detect. The metallic taste hit my tongue first, sharp, like licking a battery terminal. Then came the skin tingling, starting at my fingertips and spreading up my arms. I looked down at my coffee mug sitting on the console edge. It was floating, not drifting, not sliding, floating 6 inches above the surface, coffee suspended in a perfect sphere beside it, both defying everything I knew about physics. The sensation in my stomach told me what my instruments couldn't. Gravity had just inverted for 3 seconds. I grabbed for the emergency comm, but my hand passed through empty air. The floating coffee sphere collapsed, splashing across the console as my mug crashed down, and suddenly I weighed normal again. The tingling faded. The metallic taste lingered. My primary displays showed absolutely nothing. Field strength normal. Rotation status synchronized. Magnetic containment optimal. According to every sensor I had, gravity in Sector 12 had never wavered. But I just watched my coffee hang in midair. I wiped the spilled liquid from my keyboards with shaking hands, trying to process what I'd witnessed. Gravity doesn't just invert. The massive rotating cylinders generating our artificial gravity field can't suddenly reverse direction. The mechanical stress would tear them apart in seconds. The magnetic field generators work in harmony with the rotation, not against it. There's no mechanism in our system that could cause what I just experienced. Yet the taste in my mouth said otherwise. I pulled up the residential monitoring feeds, scanning for any reports of anomalies in the sectors above. Emergency services showed green across all boards. No calls about objects falling upward. No reports of structural stress. Either the inversion had been localized to the control center, or it had been too brief for civilians to notice. The comm panel crackled to life. Gravity control, this is environmental safety. We're seeing some unusual readings from Sector 12. You showing anything on your end? Mavira's voice. She coordinated environmental safety for our entire underground complex, monitoring everything from air quality to structural integrity. If she was calling about unusual readings, something had definitely happened. Define unusual, I said, not wanting to admit what I'd witnessed until I understood more. Stress sensors in the support columns above you spiked about 5 minutes ago. Brief reading, maybe 3 seconds, but it showed upward stress on structural elements designed for downward load. My equipment's probably glitching, but protocol says I check with you first. The coffee stain on my console felt warm under my palm. Upward stress on support columns. Exactly what would happen if gravity briefly inverted and every building above us tried to fall toward the ceiling. I'll run a diagnostic on our field generators, I said. Send me your stress readings. Already incoming. Avon, these readings don't make sense. If gravity actually inverted, even for 3 seconds, we'd have structural damage reports flooding in from above. Buildings aren't designed for upward force, but I've got nothing else from the residential sectors. The data package arrived on my secondary screen. Stress analysis showing every support column in residential blocks 12A through 12F experiencing brief upward loading at exactly 0347 hours. The timestamp matched my floating coffee perfectly. Mavira, I need you to get down here. Why? What did your diagnostic show? I stared at my primary console, still displaying perfect normal readings. Every system green. Every sensor reporting stable gravity field. But the evidence was undeniable. Gravity had inverted. My equipment couldn't detect it, and 50,000 people above us had no idea they'd just experienced a physics-defying event that could have killed them all. My diagnostic shows everything's normal, I said. That's the problem. The comm went silent for several seconds. When Mavira spoke again, her voice carried a different tone, the careful professionalism she used when something was seriously wrong. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't touch anything until I arrive. I set the comm down and stared at the coffee stain spreading across my keyboard. In my 3 years managing artificial gravity systems, I'd dealt with power fluctuations, magnetic field irregularities, and rotation synchronization failures. All of them showed up clearly on my monitoring equipment. All of them had predictable causes and established repair procedures. This was different. This was invisible to my instruments, but undeniably real. And if it happened again during peak residential hours, when people were moving around, when children were playing, when the structural loading was already near maximum. I thought about my apartment in Block 12C, 14 floors above this control center. About my neighbor's twin daughters who rode their bicycles in the hallway every morning. About the elderly man on my floor who struggled with stairs and relied on the building's consistent gravity to maintain his balance. If gravity inverted for 30 seconds instead of 3, those buildings would become death traps. I pulled up the emergency evacuation protocols for Sector 12, scanning through procedures I'd memorized but never expected to use. 50,000 people. 6 evacuation routes. Estimated clearing time, 4 hours under optimal conditions. If I was wrong about what I'd witnessed, calling for evacuation would cause economic disaster and destroy my career. If I was right and did nothing, people would die. The metallic taste returned to my tongue. This time, I was watching my instruments when it happened. Every display remained perfectly normal as my pen slowly lifted off my notepad, hovering 3 inches above the paper. The anti-gravity sensation in my stomach confirmed what my eyes saw, while my instruments remained blind to reality. The inversion lasted 5 seconds before everything settled back to normal weight. 2 inversions in 15 minutes. And my equipment still showed absolutely nothing wrong. I reached for the emergency evacuation alarm, then hesitated. 50,000 people. 4-hour evacuation. Massive disruption based on the word of one engineer whose instruments contradicted his observations. But the alternative was waiting to see if the next inversion lasted long enough to collapse buildings. My hand hovered over the alarm control as the gravity field hummed steadily around me, perfect and stable according to every sensor, yet completely unreliable in reality. In the distance, I could hear footsteps echoing through the maintenance corridors, Mavira arriving early, moving with the quick pace that meant she was more worried than she'd let on. Whatever was happening to Sector 12's gravity field, I was no longer dealing with it alone. Mavira arrived carrying 3 different sensor arrays and wearing the expression she reserved for situations that could kill people. Environmental safety coordinator for 6 years, she'd learned to trust anomalous readings even when they defied logic. Especially when they defied logic. "Show me everything," she said, setting her equipment on the auxiliary console. "And tell me why you haven't triggered evacuation protocols yet." I replayed the sensor data from both inversions, pointing out the timestamps where my coffee had floated and my pen had lifted. Primary systems show perfect normal operation, but your stress readings confirm upward loading on support columns at exactly the same moments. She connected her portable stress analyzers to my displays, running independent verification protocols. Even if gravity actually inverted twice in 30 minutes, we should be seeing hairline fractures in the concrete above us. These support columns weren't designed for tensile stress. Even 3 seconds of upward force should leave microscopic damage. The results populated her screen, structural integrity readings from the residential blocks directly overhead. She frowned, double-checking the data. Impossible. 0 damage indicators. 0 stress fractures. It's like the buildings never experienced upward force at all. She looked up at me, but my sensors definitely recorded the loading events. Something happened, but it didn't affect the structures the way physics says it should. I was about to respond when the 3rd inversion hit. This time we both felt it, that stomach-dropping sensation of weight reversing direction. Mavira's portable sensor array lifted gently off the console, floating for 7 seconds while her stress analyzers showed massive upward loading on every support column in Sector 12. But when everything settled back to normal weight, her structural integrity scans still showed zero damage. "That's not possible," she whispered, staring at her displays. "Those columns should have microfractures at minimum. The buildings above us should be reporting foundation stress alarms. But everything's reading normal except for the loading sensors themselves." "It's getting worse," I said, pointing to the duration readings. 3 seconds, then 5, now 7. If this pattern continues, the next one could last long enough to cause real damage. She was already pulling up evacuation timeline estimates. 50,000 people, multiple egress points compromised if the residential sectors lose structural integrity. "We need to start moving people now." I stared at my primary console, still showing perfect operational status across all gravity generation systems. Based on what? Equipment that says everything's fine, or buildings that show no damage from events that should have destroyed them? The comm panel buzzed before she could answer. "Gravity control, this is sector operations. Chief Drace needs to speak with you immediately." Drace's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 15 years managing critical infrastructure. "Cores, I'm getting conflicting reports about gravity field anomalies in your sector. Environmental safety is showing stress readings that don't match structural assessments." "Explain." I chose my words carefully. "We've detected 3 brief gravity field inversions in the past 45 minutes, Chief. Duration increasing from 3 to 7 seconds. Primary monitoring systems show no anomalies, but independent sensors confirm the events occurred." "Inversions. That's impossible. The mechanical systems generating your artificial gravity can't reverse operation without catastrophic failure. Are you telling me our primary monitoring equipment is malfunctioning?" Mavira leaned toward the comm. "Chief, this is environmental safety. The stress readings are consistent with gravity inversions, but the buildings aren't showing expected damage patterns. Something is happening that doesn't follow normal physics." A long pause. When Drace spoke again, his tone had shifted to the controlled calm he used during facility-wide emergencies. "I'm coming down there. Don't touch anything, don't call for evacuation, and don't broadcast this on general channels. If word gets out about gravity field instability, we'll have panic evacuations that could cause more casualties than the actual problem." The comm went silent. Mavira and I stared at each other across the control center, both thinking the same thing. 3 inversions in 45 minutes, increasing duration, and our primary monitoring systems completely blind to the events. "He's right about the panic," Mavira said quietly. "If people think gravity might reverse while they're sleeping, they'll stampede for the exits. More people die from crush injuries in evacuation corridors than from most mechanical failures." I pulled up the residential activity monitors, watching the peaceful green indicators, showing normal sleep patterns in 50,000 homes. Children in their beds, elderly residents who couldn't handle emergency evacuations, disabled individuals who needed assistance during any building evacuation. If I was wrong about the severity, calling for evacuation would traumatize thousands of people unnecessarily. If I was right and waited too long, the metallic taste returned to my tongue. "Incoming," I warned, gripping the console edge. Mavira braced herself against her equipment array. This time the inversion lasted 12 seconds. My coffee mug from the first event, now empty and sitting on the desk behind me, rose slowly toward the ceiling before settling back down. Mavira's stress sensors showed consistent upward loading across the entire residential sector above us. 12 seconds of buildings trying to fall toward the sky. 12 seconds, she said, checking her readings. Patterns accelerating. 3, 5, 7, 12. If this continues exponentially, the next one could be 30 seconds or more, I finished. Long enough for people to notice. Long enough for real structural damage. She was already running calculations on her portable systems. Avon, look at this. The loading pattern isn't random. It's following a harmonic resonance curve. Like the gravity field is building up oscillations in the generation system. The data on her screen showed a classic resonance buildup pattern, small initial disturbances growing exponentially as they reinforced each other. I'd seen similar curves in bridge engineering failures and mechanical system breakdowns. If that's accurate, the oscillations won't stop on their own, I said. They'll keep building until something breaks, or until someone shuts down the gravity generation system entirely. She looked at me with the expression she wore when she had to deliver bad news. which would mean controlled collapse of every building in Sector 12. Evacuate 50,000 people, then drop their homes on top of the evacuation routes. The emergency access door burst open as Chief Drace entered, followed by someone I hadn't expected to see. Inverts Chun, former gravity systems technician, who'd transferred out of Sector 12 8 months ago after some kind of incident. Inverts looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with me. "Before we go any further," Drace said, "Inverts has something to tell you about what happened here last year. Something that was classified until about 20 minutes ago." Inverts finally looked up, guilt written across their face. "The gravity generators have a resonance flaw that builds over time. We discovered it during routine maintenance last March, but the fix would have required shutting down the entire sector for 6 weeks. Instead, we reset the resonance tracking systems and installed manual dampening protocols." My blood turned cold. Manual dampening protocols? Someone has to adjust the field harmonics every 12 hours to prevent oscillation buildup. It's been working for 8 months. Ivers's voice dropped. But if someone missed a dampening cycle, or if the tracking systems failed, the oscillations would restart exactly where they left off, I whispered, understanding flooding through me. "That's why my primary monitors aren't showing the inversions. They're reading from the reset tracking systems, not the actual field generators." Mavira was staring at her stress readings with new comprehension. "And that's why the buildings aren't showing damage. The inversions are happening in a specific harmonic frequency that the structures can briefly tolerate. But each one stresses the materials a little more." "Who is supposed to perform the dampening adjustment at midnight?" Drace asked. Inverts checked the duty roster, their face going pale. "Marcus Webb, third shift technician. But according to the security logs, he never accessed the dampening controls last night." I felt the familiar metallic taste returning to my tongue. "Incoming inversion," I announced, and this time all 4 of us braced for impact. 21 seconds. Equipment floating throughout the control room. Stress alarms finally beginning to sound from the residential sectors above as building foundations experienced loading beyond their original design parameters. When gravity returned to normal, Mavira's structural integrity scans showed the first hairline fractures in support column foundations. "That's it," Drace said, reaching for the evacuation alarm. "We're past the tolerance threshold. I'm calling general evacuation for all residential blocks." "Wait," Inverts said urgently. "If you evacuate now, you'll have 50,000 people in stairwells and corridors when the next inversion hits. 21-second inversion means the next one could be 40 seconds or more. People will be thrown against ceilings, falling up elevator shafts, crushed against emergency exit doors that open the wrong direction." Drace's hand hovered over the alarm control. "Then what do you suggest?" "Someone needs to reach the manual dampening controls and reset the resonance buildup," Inverts replied. "But they're located in the primary generation chamber, right next to the rotating cylinders. If an inversion happens while someone's in there, they didn't need to finish." The massive rotating cylinders generating our artificial gravity were surrounded by magnetic fields strong enough to crush human bones. If gravity inverted while someone was in that chamber, they'd be slammed into machinery that could cut them in half. I looked at the duty roster showing Marcus Webb's missed dampening cycle, then at my console still reporting perfect normal operation, while the building above us slowly tore itself apart. "How long until the next inversion?" I asked. Mavira checked her resonance calculations. "Based on the exponential pattern, approximately 6 minutes. 6 minutes to decide. Risk evacuation casualties from people trapped in corridors during gravity reversal, or send someone into the generation chamber, knowing they might not survive if the timing went wrong." I was already reaching for the chamber access controls when the 5th inversion began. This time, it lasted 31 seconds, and the structural damage alarms finally started screaming from every residential block in Sector 12. The structural damage alarms created a wall of sound that made thinking nearly impossible. I silenced them with trembling fingers, but the damage readings on Mavira's displays told the story. Hairline fractures spreading through support foundations, stress indicators climbing into yellow zones across 12 residential blocks. 31 seconds, I said, more to myself than anyone else. The pattern's accelerating faster than exponential. Drace was studying the evacuation protocols on his tablet, his face grim. Emergency evacuation procedures assume normal gravity throughout the process. Stairwells, corridors, emergency lighting, none of it designed for people falling upward. If the next inversion hits 45 seconds or longer, Mavira added, checking her resonance calculations, we'll have people trapped in elevator shafts when they reverse direction. Emergency exits that suddenly open onto the ceiling instead of escape routes. Ivarus spoke quietly from beside the duty station. There's something else. The manual dampening procedure requires someone to be physically present in the generation chamber for approximately 3 minutes. They have to adjust 12 separate field harmonics in sequence while the cylinders are running at full power. I felt my stomach drop, even without another gravity inversion. 3 minutes? If an inversion starts during that process, the person performing the dampening would be caught between rotating cylinders generating conflicting magnetic fields. Ivarus finished. The gravitational shear would tear them apart before they could escape. The metallic taste filled my mouth again, stronger this time. Everyone brace. Bigger one coming. This inversion lasted 43 seconds. Long enough for me to watch my coffee mug float slowly up to the ceiling, hover there like it was considering its options, then drift sideways before dropping back down. Long enough for people in the residential sectors to notice their bedside lamps lifting off tables, their children floating in their cribs. When gravity restored, the communication board lit up with incoming calls from residential security, building maintenance, and civilian emergency services. Drace ignored them all, focused on something more immediate. Ivarus, where exactly is Marcus Webb right now? Ivarus checked the personnel database, their face growing increasingly pale. According to the duty roster, he should be in Section C performing routine maintenance on the secondary circulation pumps. But his access card shows no activity since yesterday evening. Security cameras recorded him leaving the facility at 23:47 last night, 13 minutes before his midnight dampening shift was supposed to begin. He left. I stared at the access logs. The dampening procedure was supposed to happen at midnight, and he just left? Look at this, Mavira interrupted, pointing to her stress analysis displays. The first inversion occurred at exactly 0:13 this morning, 13 minutes after the missed dampening cycle. The resonance buildup started the instant the dampening window closed, which means someone knew exactly when to avoid being here. Drace was already reaching for his secure emergency communication device. I'm calling security to locate Webb immediately. Missing a critical safety procedure that could kill 50,000 people isn't something that happens by accident, especially not with that precise timing. The comm system buzzed with an incoming call from Level 7 residential. Drace accepted it reluctantly. Sector Operations, this is Building Supervisor Martinez in Block 7. I've got residents calling about objects floating in their apartments. Are we having some kind of gravity field malfunction? I watched Drace's face as he processed the question. 43 seconds had been long enough for civilians to notice. The secret was out. Martinez, this is Chief Drace. Implement Code Yellow procedures for your block immediately. Residents should secure loose objects and remain in their homes until further notice. Do not use elevators and stay away from windows and balconies. Code Yellow? Chief, that's for structural integrity concerns. Are you telling me the building foundations are compromised? I'm telling you to follow protocols and await official announcements, Drace replied, ending the call. He immediately switched to the facility-wide emergency channel. All sector supervisors, implement Code Yellow procedures immediately. Residents are to secure loose objects and remain in their homes. This is not a drill. The next few minutes were chaos. 12 building supervisors calling in with panicked questions, resident complaints about floating furniture, and maintenance crews reporting stress fractures in areas that had been perfectly stable that morning. Ivan, I said during a brief lull, how long do we have before the resonance buildup becomes irreversible? They consulted a tablet covered in technical diagrams and harmonic frequency calculations. Based on the exponential progression we're seeing, maybe 2 hours before the oscillations reach critical amplitude. After that, even shutting down the gravity generators completely won't stop the structural collapse. The buildings will fall apart from accumulated stress damage. 2 hours, Mavira repeated, looking at her evacuation timeline estimates. Full evacuation of 50,000 people takes a minimum of 4 hours under normal conditions, with gravity inversions happening every 15 to 20 minutes. We can't evacuate, I realized. Even if we started right now, half the people would still be in the buildings when we reached critical amplitude. The room fell silent except for the steady hum of the gravity generation systems and the occasional beep of incoming emergency calls that Drace was no longer answering. "There is another option," Inverts said quietly. "The dampening procedure can be performed manually, but it requires someone to access the primary generation chamber during a stable period between inversions." "How stable?" I asked. "Completely stable. If an inversion begins while someone is in the chamber adjusting the harmonic fields, the conflicting gravitational forces will kill them instantly." Inverts pulled up a schematic of the generation chamber on their tablet. "The manual controls are located here, approximately 50 meters from the chamber entrance, right in the center of the most dangerous zone." I studied the schematic. The chamber contained 12 massive rotating cylinders, each generating overlapping gravitational fields through electromagnetic manipulation. During normal operation, the fields were perfectly synchronized. During an inversion, they would be chaotically conflicted. "How long between inversions right now?" I asked Mavira. She checked her resonance tracking. "Based on the current pattern, approximately 12 minutes. The procedure takes 3 minutes if performed by someone familiar with the system." "That leaves a 9-minute safety margin," I said. "If the pattern holds," she corrected. "But we've already seen acceleration. The next gap could be shorter." Drace looked up from his emergency communications. "I can't ask someone to take that risk. If I order someone into that chamber and they die because the timing was wrong." "You're not ordering anyone," I said, checking the chamber access protocols on my console. "I'm volunteering. I know the harmonic adjustment procedures from my engineering training, and I have clearance to access the generation chamber." "Even no." Mavira grabbed my arm. "You said yourself the pattern's accelerating. What if the next inversion comes early?" I looked around the control room at the people, depending on my decision. Drace with his tablet full of evacuation procedures that wouldn't work. Mavira with her stress readings, showing foundation damage that was getting worse with each inversion. Inverts with their guilty knowledge of a cover-up that had led us to this moment. Through the observation windows, I could see the residential towers above us, 50,000 people going about their morning routines while their homes slowly tore themselves apart from impossible physics. "The inversions are following a harmonic resonance pattern," I said, pulling up the frequency analysis on my screen. "If I time the procedure to start immediately after an inversion, I should have maximum stable time before the next one." The metallic taste returned to my mouth like clockwork. "Incoming," I announced. "Everyone brace." This time the inversion lasted 57 seconds. Almost a full minute of gravity pushing upward instead of down, of objects and people pressed against ceilings, of building foundations experiencing tensile stress they were never designed to handle. When it ended, Mavira's displays showed critical stress indicators in 6 support columns. Red zones spreading through the foundation systems. "The next one will be at least 90 seconds, she said quietly. "Maybe longer. If people are caught in stairwells or corridors, they'll be thrown 50 feet upward against concrete ceilings," I finished. "Then fall 50 feet back down when gravity returns." I was already moving toward the chamber access controls when Inverts stopped me. "Wait, there's something else. Something I should have told you earlier." Their voice carried the weight of 8 months of guilt. "The reason I transferred out of Sector 12 wasn't because we discovered the resonance flaw. It was because of how we chose to handle it." "What do you mean?" "The manual dampening procedure. We tested it during the original installation last March. I was the one who performed the test runs." They looked down at their hands. "On the 3rd test, I miscalculated the timing. An inversion started while I was in the chamber. My blood went cold." "What happened?" "I survived because the test inversions were only lasting 2 or 3 seconds then. Just long enough for me to be thrown against the chamber wall and break 3 ribs. But I saw what happens to human tissue caught between conflicting gravitational fields. They met my eyes. The metal tools I was carrying were torn into pieces, literally shredded by the gravitational shear. The control room fell silent except for the persistent hum of the gravity generators and the soft beeping of emergency calls from increasingly panicked building supervisors. "So you're telling me," I said slowly, "that if I miscalculate the timing by even a few seconds, I'll be shredded like metal tools in a gravitational blender?" "Yes." I looked at my console showing 50,000 people living normal lives 60 meters above us, then at Mavira's stress readings, showing their homes developing critical structural damage, then at the chamber access controls that could save them or kill me. "How long until the next inversion?" I asked. Mavira checked her calculations. 11 minutes, if the pattern holds. I reached for the chamber access keypad. Then I better get started. The chamber access keypad beeped softly as I entered my authorization code, a sound completely at odds with the magnitude of what I was about to attempt. Through the reinforced observation window, I could see the generation chamber stretching out like a mechanical cathedral. 12 massive rotating cylinders, each one 3 stories tall, their electromagnetic fields creating the artificial gravity that kept 50,000 people safely anchored to their floors instead of floating against their ceilings. Avon, wait. Drace's voice carried the weight of command authority, mixed with something I'd never heard from him before, fear. I can't let you do this. If something goes wrong, if the timing is off by even 30 seconds, then 50,000 people die when their buildings collapse. I finished, watching the massive cylinders rotate through their precisely choreographed patterns. Each one generated overlapping gravitational fields through controlled electromagnetic manipulation. During normal operation, they worked in perfect synchronization. During an inversion, they became a chaotic maze of conflicting forces that could tear apart anything caught between them. The metallic taste flooded my mouth again, stronger than before. Incoming, I announced, stepping back from the chamber entrance. This is going to be a big one. The 4th inversion hit at exactly the 11-minute mark, just as Mavira's calculations predicted. But it wasn't the duration that made my hands shake. It was watching the massive generation cylinders through the observation window. For the first time, I could actually see them fighting against each other, their rotation speeds fluctuating wildly as their electromagnetic fields generated conflicting gravitational vectors. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes and counting. Objects throughout the control room weren't just floating anymore. They were orbiting in impossible patterns as multiple gravity sources pulled them in different directions. My coffee mug traced a figure 8 through the air before smashing against the wall. Mavira's tablet spun end over end near the ceiling, its screen flickering with stress readings that kept climbing into red zones. Look at the generation cylinders, Iverus whispered, pointing through the observation window. The electromagnetic fields are becoming unstable. That's not just an inversion, that's harmonic cascade failure. Through the window, I watched in horrified fascination as the 12 cylinders began to desynchronize. Their rotation speeds no longer matched, creating visible distortions in the air around them as gravitational fields overlapped and interfered with each other. It looked like heat shimmer, but I knew it was space itself being twisted by conflicting forces. The inversion lasted 3 minutes and 14 seconds. When gravity finally restored, the impact of everything falling simultaneously sounded like thunder. But the real sound that made my stomach drop was the groaning of metal under stress coming from the generation chamber itself. Structural damage to the generation systems, Mavira reported, her voice tight with panic. The cylinders weren't designed to operate during gravitational conflicts. Look at these stress readings. We've got hairline fractures developing in the electromagnetic containment housings. I studied her displays, trying to process the implications. If the containment housings fail, the electromagnetic fields will lose coherence, Iverus finished. Instead of controlled gravitational manipulation, we'll have uncontrolled electromagnetic discharge. The cylinders will tear themselves apart, and the gravitational shockwave will collapse every building in a 5-kilometer radius. Drace was frantically coordinating with emergency services through his headset, but I could hear the frustration in his voice. No, you cannot initiate mass evacuation during active gravitational anomalies. People will be thrown against ceilings and crushed when gravity returns. We need the anomalies stopped first. Through the facility's communication system, we could hear chaos erupting above us. Building supervisors reporting furniture floating through apartments, residents calling emergency services about gravity going wrong, and maintenance crews discovering critical stress fractures in support structures that had been perfectly stable that morning. Chief Drace, this is Martinez in Block 7 again. Came a panicked voice through the comm. I've got 17 people trapped in the main elevator. It reversed direction during that last event, and they're stuck between floors. The car is hanging by its emergency brakes, and I can hear the cables starting to snap. Emergency response teams are on their way, Drace replied, but we all knew the truth. Standard rescue equipment assumed gravity always pulled down. Rescuing people from an elevator shaft where gravity might suddenly reverse was beyond current emergency protocols. How long until the next inversion? I asked Mavira. She checked her harmonic analysis, and her face went pale. Based on the acceleration pattern, 8 minutes. Maybe less. But Avon, look at the amplitude readings. The next inversion isn't going to be 3 minutes. The harmonic cascade is building exponentially. I studied her projections, feeling cold dread settle in my chest. How long? 6 minutes minimum. Possibly longer. She met my eyes. If you're in that chamber when it starts, I'll be trapped in there for the entire duration, I finished. 6 minutes surrounded by 12 massive cylinders generating chaotic gravitational fields in random directions. 6 minutes of being pulled apart by forces that could shred metal tools like tissue paper. Ivorous stepped forward, their voice carrying 8 months of guilt and determination. I should be the one to go in there. I know the manual dampening procedure better than anyone, and I'm the reason we're in this situation. I should have insisted on a proper fix instead of just transferring to a different sector. No, I said firmly. You survived one encounter with those fields because the inversion only lasted seconds and you were thrown clear. A 6-minute exposure with multiple cylinder desynchronization? Nobody survives that, no matter how experienced they are. Drace looked up from his emergency coordination. There has to be another option. Remote operation, automated systems, something that doesn't require a person to be physically present in that chamber. The manual controls are hardwired and require direct electromagnetic field manipulation, Ivorous explained. The harmonic adjustments have to be made in real time, responding to the specific resonance patterns of each cylinder. No computer system can process the variables fast enough. Through the observation window, I watched the generation cylinders continuing their ominous rotation. Even during this supposedly stable period, I could see slight variations in their speeds, tiny desynchronizations that indicated the harmonic cascade was still building. The next inversion would be worse, and the one after that would be catastrophic. What if we shut down the entire gravity system? I asked. Just turn everything off and let natural gravity take over? Too late, Mavira said, checking her calculations. The harmonic resonance is now self-sustaining. Even with the generation systems offline, the accumulated electromagnetic energy in the containment fields will continue the cascade. We'd still get the inversions, but without any ability to control or stop them. The facility's emergency communication system crackled with another incoming call. Sector operations, this is Building Supervisor Chun in Block 3. I need immediate guidance. We've got residents reporting that their children are floating near the ceiling and can't get down. The parents are trying to use chairs and tables to reach them, but if another gravity event happens... Drace closed his eyes briefly, then responded. Instruct residents to create soft landing areas with mattresses and pillows directly below any floating individuals. Do not attempt rescue during unstable gravitational conditions. Chief, these are 3-year-old children stuck against the ceiling. Their parents aren't going to wait for official protocols. Through the comm system, we could hear panicked voices in the background, parents calling to their floating children, the sound of furniture being moved, someone crying. I looked around the control room at my colleagues, each of them facing the same impossible calculation. Certain death for thousands of people above us, or probable death for whoever entered the generation chamber. The mathematics of disaster, with human lives as the variables. 6 minutes until the next inversion, Mavira announced quietly. Which gives me approximately 90 seconds after it ends to complete the manual dampening procedure before the following inversion starts, I said, already moving toward the chamber access controls. Assuming the pattern holds, assuming the next inversion doesn't last longer than predicted, assuming I can adjust 12 separate harmonic fields while under extreme time pressure. Avon, stop. Drace's voice carried absolute authority. As Sector Chief, I'm ordering you not to enter that chamber. The risk assessment is unacceptable. I paused with my hand on the access keypad. Then what do you suggest, Chief? Wait here while children float against ceilings and buildings collapse from gravitational stress? Watch 50,000 people die because we were too afraid to take a calculated risk. It's not a calculated risk, he replied. It's suicide with extra steps. The metallic taste returned to my mouth like a familiar enemy. Incoming. Everyone brace. But this time, something was different. Instead of the gradual build-up I'd come to expect, the 5th inversion hit like a hammer blow. Gravity didn't gently reverse. It snapped from down to up with violent suddenness, throwing everything in the room against the ceiling with bone-jarring force. I found myself pressed against the ceiling tiles, staring down at the floor 20 feet below, while Mavira's equipment rained upward around us. Through the observation window, The view of the generation chamber was now upside down, and what I saw made my blood freeze. 2 of the 12 cylinders had stopped rotating entirely. Their electromagnetic containment fields were flickering like dying light bulbs, and I could see actual sparks arcing between their housings. The remaining 10 cylinders were spinning at wildly different speeds, their gravitational fields creating visible distortions in the chamber atmosphere. Containment failure in progress. Inverts shouted from somewhere near the ceiling. If those fields collapse completely, the electromagnetic discharge will destroy the entire facility. The inversion lasted 7 minutes and 38 seconds. When gravity finally restored and we crashed back to the floor, half of Mavira's monitoring equipment was destroyed, Drace was bleeding from a head wound, and the sound coming from the generation chamber was no longer the steady hum of synchronized operation. It was the irregular grinding of machinery eating itself alive. "Status report," I said, struggling to my feet and checking the displays that were still functional. "Catastrophic," Mavira replied, blood streaming from her nose. "We've lost primary monitoring for cylinders 7 and 11. The electromagnetic containment is failing faster than the harmonic projections predicted. Look at these readings. We're not just approaching cascade failure, we're already in it." Through the shattered observation window, I could see emergency lighting activating throughout the generation chamber as primary power fluctuated. The 2 stopped cylinders were surrounded by visible energy discharges, crackling barriers of electromagnetic force that painted the chamber walls in shifting blue light. Drace struggled to his headset, trying to re-establish communication with the residential sectors. Static filled the control room as electromagnetic interference from the failing containment systems disrupted all electronic communications. "Can't reach, static. 17 people still trapped in elevator, more static. Children floating, please respond." "Communications are down," he reported grimly. "We've lost contact with all residential blocks. Emergency services, building supervisors, evacuation coordinators, everything." I stared at the chamber access controls, still functional despite the chaos around us. The keypad glowed with soft green light, waiting for my authorization to unlock the entrance to what would very likely be my death. Through the shattered observation window, I could see the 10 remaining cylinders grinding through their irregular rotations, electromagnetic arcs dancing between their housings like deadly aurora. "How long until complete containment failure?" I asked Inverts. They consulted their cracked tablet, its display flickering but still showing harmonic cascade projections. "Based on the current rate of deterioration, 12 minutes until electromagnetic field collapse. After that, the gravitational shockwave propagates through bedrock in all directions. Everything within 5 kilometers gets torn apart at the molecular level. 12 minutes. 50,000 people above us, children floating against ceilings, 17 people trapped in a failing elevator, and an entire city about to be erased from existence by conflicting gravitational forces." I placed my hand on the chamber access keypad, but didn't enter the code yet. "Mavira, what's your best estimate for timing between the next inversions?" She checked her remaining functional displays, her hands shaking as she tried to calculate patterns from increasingly chaotic data. "The cascade failure is accelerating everything. Based on the electromagnetic interference patterns, maybe 3 minutes until the next inversion. Then 90 seconds after that. Then maybe 45 seconds. Decreasing intervals," I said, feeling the weight of impossible mathematics. "Which means if I go in there now, I'll be caught in the chamber during multiple inversions with no time between them to escape." "Don't," Drace said firmly. "Avon, I'm ordering you not to enter that chamber. We'll find another way." "What other way?" I snapped, frustration and fear making my voice sharp. "The containment systems are failing, communications are down, and we've got 3 minutes before the next gravity inversion throws those trapped people around like toys in a blender. What exactly is your alternative plan, Chief?" He didn't answer because there wasn't an answer. We'd reached the point where all the safe options had evaporated, leaving only degrees of catastrophe. Through the broken observation window, I watched sparks cascade from Cylinder 7 as its electromagnetic housing developed visible cracks. Each spark represented thousands of people above us getting closer to death, whether from gravitational shear or building collapse, or simply being thrown against concrete ceilings hard enough to break every bone in their bodies. "I have to try," I said, entering the first digit of my authorization code. "Avon." Mavira grabbed my arm, her grip tight enough to hurt. "The manual dampening procedure takes 3 minutes under ideal conditions. You just said yourself the inversions are coming every 90 seconds now. Even if you time it perfectly, even if you start the procedure the instant an inversion ends. I'll be caught halfway through when the next one starts, I finished. I know. The mathematical reality was inescapable. Entering the chamber meant certain death. But staying outside meant 50,000 certain deaths, including children who were probably crying for their parents right now as they floated helplessly against their bedroom ceilings. I entered my full authorization code. The chamber access door began its slow, mechanical opening sequence, a process that took 30 seconds and couldn't be rushed or interrupted once started. Wait, Ivers said suddenly. There might be another option. The dampening procedure requires adjusting 12 harmonic fields in sequence, but what if we don't adjust them in sequence? What if we adjust them simultaneously? That's not how it works, I replied, watching the access door continue its ponderous opening. 20 seconds left. The harmonic fields interact with each other. Adjusting them simultaneously could create feedback loops that make the cascade failure even worse. Or it could create constructive interference that dampens the resonance immediately, they countered. Instead of a 3-minute procedure, it becomes a 30-second procedure. Fast enough to complete between inversions. 15 seconds until the door finished opening. That's theoretical, Mavira said. We've never tested simultaneous harmonic adjustment. The feedback could destabilize the remaining functional cylinders. The functional cylinders are already destabilizing, I pointed out. Look at them. Through the observation window, cylinder 9 was beginning to wobble on its axis, its rotation becoming visibly irregular as electromagnetic containment fluctuated. Cylinder 3 was throwing sparks in steady streams now, and the sound coming from the chamber was like a dozen freight trains having a mechanical breakdown simultaneously. 10 seconds. If simultaneous adjustment works, it saves everyone, I said. If it doesn't work, we're no worse off than we already are. And if I don't try something, 50,000 people die in 10 minutes when the containment fields collapse. 5 seconds. The chamber access door completed its opening sequence with a soft pneumatic hiss. Beyond the threshold lay 50 meters of metal walkway, leading to the central control platform, surrounded by 12 massive cylinders that were slowly tearing themselves apart with conflicting gravitational forces. I stepped through the doorway and immediately felt the skin-crawling sensation of multiple gravity fields pulling at my body from different directions. It was like being gently stretched in 12 directions at once, not painful yet, but deeply wrong in a way that made every nerve-ending protest. Avon, get back here. Drace's voice echoed through the chamber's communication system. That's a direct order. I kept walking toward the central control platform, fighting the disorienting sensation of gravity that couldn't decide which direction it wanted to pull. Around me, the electromagnetic arcs from the failing containment systems painted everything in shifting blue light, and the grinding sound of damaged machinery filled the air with mechanical agony. 2 minutes until the next inversion, Mavira's voice crackled through the comm system. Avon, please get out of there. I reached the central control platform and looked at the manual harmonic adjustment controls, 12 separate electromagnetic field regulators, each one controlling a massive gravitational generation cylinder. According to standard procedure, I was supposed to adjust them one at a time in a specific sequence designed to prevent harmonic interference. But standard procedure assumed I had 3 minutes of stable gravitational conditions. I placed my hands on all 12 controls simultaneously. Avon, what are you doing? Ivers's voice carried a note of panic. Simultaneous adjustment was just theoretical. We don't know what will happen. Then I guess we're about to find out, I replied, and began adjusting all 12 harmonic fields at once. The immediate result was chaos. Every cylinder in the chamber began changing its rotation speed simultaneously, creating a cacophony of grinding metal and electromagnetic discharge that made the previous sound seem quiet by comparison. The gravity fields around me became completely erratic. I felt myself being pulled toward 3 different cylinders at once while something else tried to push me toward the ceiling. But something else was happening too. The irregular, chaotic patterns of the failing containment systems were beginning to stabilize as the 12 electromagnetic fields found new equilibrium points. The visible distortions in the chamber atmosphere started smoothing out, and the grinding sound shifted from mechanical agony to something closer to synchronized operation. It's working, I whispered, making fine adjustments to the harmonic controls as the gravitational fields began resonating in constructive rather than destructive patterns. The cascade is dampening. I can feel the stability returning. Avon, get out of there now. Mavira's voice was frantic. 30 seconds until the next inversion. I made the final harmonic adjustments, watching as the last visible electromagnetic arcs faded from the cylinder housings. The chamber fell quiet except for the steady, synchronized hum of properly operating gravity generation systems. Through the observation window, I could see status lights changing from red to yellow to green on the control room displays. 20 seconds. I ran for the chamber exit, but 50 meters of metal walkway, while fighting residual gravitational effects, was longer than it seemed. My body felt heavy and light alternately as I passed between different electromagnetic field zones, and my inner ear was completely confused about which direction was up. 10 seconds. 5 seconds. I dove through the chamber access doorway just as the sixth inversion began, landing hard on the control room floor as gravity suddenly reversed. But this time was different. Instead of the violent snap of previous inversions, the gravitational field reversed smoothly, gently, like water flowing uphill instead of a hammer blow to the head. The inversion lasted only 15 seconds, and when gravity restored, it did so gradually rather than dropping everything simultaneously like a mechanical failure. Harmonic cascade terminated, Mavira reported, her voice filled with amazed relief. All containment systems showing stable operation. Gravitational field coherence restored to normal parameters. Through the observation window, I could see all 12 cylinders rotating in perfect synchronization again, their electromagnetic field stable, and their containment housings no longer throwing sparks. The chamber's emergency lighting had switched back to normal operation, and the grinding mechanical sounds had been replaced by the steady, reassuring hum of properly functioning systems. Drace was already coordinating with emergency services through his restored headset. All units, this is sector operations. Gravitational anomaly has been resolved. Initiate standard rescue procedures for trapped individuals. Gravity is now stable and normal. But I could see something in Ivers's expression that made my stomach clench with renewed dread. They were staring at their tablet, not with relief but with growing alarm. "What is it?" I asked. "The harmonic dampening worked," they said slowly. "The cascade failure has been stopped, and the generation systems are operating normally." "That's good news, isn't it?" "It should be. But look at these readings." They showed me their tablet display. "The gravitational field is stable now, but the electromagnetic signature is completely different from baseline. The dampening procedure didn't just stop the cascade, it reset the system to an entirely new operational state." I studied the readings, trying to understand what they meant. The gravitational output was within normal parameters, all safety systems showed green, and the cylinder synchronization was perfect. But Ivers was right. The underlying electromagnetic patterns were subtly but fundamentally different from the original specifications. "Different how?" I asked. "I don't know," they admitted. "The system is working, gravity is stable, people are safe. But we've essentially performed an uncontrolled experiment on a gravitational generation network that affects 50,000 people. We have no way of knowing what the long-term effects might be." Through the facility's restored communication system, we could hear the relief in the voices of building supervisors as they reported successful rescues. The 17 people trapped in the elevator were being extracted safely. Children who had been floating against ceilings were back on solid ground with their parents. The immediate crisis was over. But as I looked at the electromagnetic readings showing stable but fundamentally altered gravitational field patterns, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd traded one problem for another. The system was working now, but it was working differently than it ever had before, and nobody knew what that difference might mean. The chamber access keypad beeped softly as I entered my authorization code, a sound completely at odds with the magnitude of what I was about to attempt. Through the reinforced observation window, I could see the generation chamber stretching out like a mechanical cathedral. 12 massive rotating cylinders, each one 3 stories tall, their electromagnetic fields creating the artificial gravity that kept 50,000 people safely anchored to their floors instead of floating against their ceilings. "Avon, wait." Drace's voice carried the weight of command authority, mixed with something I'd never heard from him before, fear. "I can't authorize this. If something goes wrong, if the timing is off by even 30 seconds, then 50,000 people die when their buildings collapse." I finished, watching the massive cylinders rotate through their increasingly erratic patterns. Each one generated overlapping gravitational fields through controlled electromagnetic manipulation. During normal operation, they worked in perfect synchronization. During an inversion, they became a chaotic maze of conflicting forces that could tear apart anything caught between them. The metallic taste flooded my mouth again, stronger than before. Our 3-minute warning system. Incoming, I announced, stepping back from the chamber entrance. This is going to be the worst one yet. The 5th inversion hit at exactly the predicted time, but the duration shattered our calculations. What should have been another 3 to 4 minute event stretched on relentlessly. Objects throughout the control room weren't just floating anymore. They were orbiting in impossible patterns as multiple gravity sources pulled them in different directions. My coffee mug traced a figure 8 through the air before smashing against the wall. Mavira's tablet spun end over end near the ceiling, its screen flickering with stress readings that kept climbing into red zones. 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes and counting. Look at the generation cylinders, Inverts whispered, pointing through the observation window with a shaking hand. The electromagnetic fields are completely destabilizing. That's not just an inversion anymore. That's the beginning of total containment collapse. Through the window, I watched in horrified fascination as 2 of the 12 cylinders began showing visible signs of mechanical failure. Their rotation speeds no longer matched the others, creating dangerous resonance patterns that manifested as heat shimmer distortions in the air, space itself being twisted by conflicting gravitational forces. The inversion lasted 8 minutes and 14 seconds. When gravity finally restored, the impact of everything falling simultaneously sounded like thunder, but the real sound that made my stomach drop was the new grinding noise coming from the generation chamber, metal under stress beyond its design limits. Catastrophic damage assessment coming in, Mavira reported, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. We've lost primary monitoring for cylinders 7 and 11. The electromagnetic containment housings have developed stress fractures. The harmonic resonance is now self-sustaining even during stable periods. I studied her displays, trying to process implications that seemed too large to grasp. Self-sustaining how? The system can't return to baseline anymore, Inverts explained, their technical knowledge cutting through the confusion. Each inversion is building energy that doesn't dissipate completely. The next event won't just be longer, it'll be exponentially more destructive. Drace was frantically coordinating with emergency services through his headset, but the responses I could hear made everything worse. No, you cannot initiate mass evacuation during active gravitational anomalies. People will be thrown against ceilings and crushed when gravity returns. We need the anomalies stopped first. What do you mean 17 people trapped in an elevator? How many children are floating against bedroom ceilings? The facility's communication system crackled with increasing desperation from the residential sectors above us. Building supervisors reporting structural damage, parents unable to reach children stuck against ceilings, maintenance crews discovering that support beams designed for downward force were developing cracks from repeated upward stress. Chief Drace, this is Martinez in Block 7, came a panicked voice. The main elevator car reversed direction during that last event, and the cables snapped. 17 people are trapped between floors, hanging by emergency brakes that were never designed for this kind of gravitational stress. I can hear the brakes starting to slip. Through the comm system, we could hear chaos erupting, parents calling to their floating children, the sound of furniture being dragged across rooms, someone crying in the background. The human cost of our technical crisis was becoming impossible to ignore. How long until the next inversion? I asked Mavira. She checked her harmonic analysis, and her face went pale. Based on the new resonance patterns, 4 minutes maximum. But Avon, look at the amplitude projections. The next inversion isn't going to be 8 minutes. I studied her calculations, feeling cold dread settle in my chest. How long? Minimum 12 minutes. Possibly longer. She met my eyes with the look of someone delivering a death sentence. If you're in that chamber when it starts, I'll be trapped in there for the entire duration, I finished. 12 minutes surrounded by 12 massive cylinders generating chaotic gravitational fields in random directions. 12 minutes of being pulled apart by forces that could shred reinforced steel like tissue paper. Inverts stepped forward, 8 months of guilt making their voice shake. I should be the one to go in there. I know the manual dampening procedure better than anyone, and I'm the one who caused this by not insisting on a proper fix 8 months ago. No, I said firmly. You barely survived 30 seconds of exposure before. 12 minutes with complete containment failure? Nobody survives that. Drace looked up from his emergency coordination, blood from a head wound he'd sustained during the latest inversion, making him look haggard. There has to be another option. Remote operation, automated failsafes, something that doesn't require a suicide mission. The manual controls are hardwired specifically to prevent remote operation, Inverts explained bitterly. Corporate policy after the Istanbul incident. They didn't want hackers or foreign agents shutting down gravity remotely. The harmonic adjustments have to be made physically, in real time, responding to the specific resonance patterns of each cylinder. Through the observation window, I watched the generation cylinders continuing their ominous rotation. Even during this supposedly stable period, I could see slight variations in their speeds, tiny desynchronizations that indicated the harmonic cascade was still building toward catastrophic failure. What about emergency shutdown? I asked desperately. Just turn everything off and let natural gravity take over? Too late, Mavira said, showing me her latest calculations. The accumulated electromagnetic energy in the containment fields is now self-sustaining. Even with the generation systems completely offline, the energy discharge would continue the gravitational inversions. We'd lose all control with no ability to stop or predict them. The facility's emergency system crackled with another incoming call that made everyone in the room freeze. Sector operations, this is Building Supervisor Chun in Block 3. I need immediate guidance. We've got children floating near bedroom ceilings. Parents are standing on chairs trying to reach them, but if another gravity event happens while they're extended like that, the unspoken implication hung in the air. Parents would fall from chairs onto concrete floors while their children were thrown against ceilings with potentially lethal force. Drace closed his eyes briefly, then responded with professional calm that I knew was costing him everything. Instruct residents to create soft landing areas with mattresses and pillows. Do not attempt rescue during unstable gravitational conditions. We're working to resolve the situation. Chief, these are 3-year-old children crying for their parents. These people aren't going to wait for official protocols. I looked around the control room at my colleagues, each of them staring at displays that showed the mathematical reality of our situation. Certain death for thousands of people above us, or probable death for whoever entered the generation chamber during the next inversion. The arithmetic of disaster, with human lives as the variables. 2 minutes until the next inversion, Mavira announced quietly. I moved toward the chamber access controls, my decision crystallizing with terrible clarity. I'm going in there. The manual dampening procedure takes approximately 3 minutes under ideal conditions. If I time it perfectly, start the instant the next inversion ends, I might have enough time before the following event. Avon, stop. Drace's voice carried absolute command authority. As Sector Chief, I'm ordering you not to enter that chamber. The risk assessment is completely unacceptable. I paused with my hand on the access keypad, feeling the weight of 50,000 lives and the mathematics of disaster. Then what do you suggest, Chief? Wait here while children float helplessly and buildings collapse from gravitational stress. Count down the minutes until total containment failure kills everyone within 5 kilometers. It's not a calculated risk, he replied grimly. It's suicide with a technical procedure attached. The metallic taste returned to my mouth like a familiar enemy, but this time it was accompanied by something new. A skin-crawling sensation of electromagnetic fields becoming unstable. Incoming. Everyone brace. This is going to be worse than the last one. The 6th inversion hit with violent suddenness that threw everything in the room against the ceiling with bone-jarring force. But instead of the gradual reversal we'd experienced before, this time gravity snapped from down to up like a rubber band breaking under tension. I found myself pressed against the ceiling tiles, staring down at the floor 20 feet below, while equipment rained upward around us with crashes that sounded like the room was being torn apart. Through the observation window, the view of the generation chamber was now upside down, and what I saw made my blood freeze. 3 of the 12 cylinders had stopped rotating entirely. Their electromagnetic containment fields were flickering like dying light bulbs, throwing visible energy discharges that painted the chamber walls in shifting blue light. The remaining 9 cylinders were spinning at wildly different speeds, their gravitational fields creating impossible spatial distortions. Partial containment failure, Inverts shouted from somewhere near the ceiling. If those fields collapse completely, the electromagnetic discharge will destroy the entire facility. The inversion lasted 14 minutes and 12 seconds. When gravity finally restored and we crashed back to the floor, half of Mavira's monitoring equipment was destroyed. Drace was bleeding from a deeper head wound, and the sound coming from the generation chamber was no longer mechanical operation. It was the irregular grinding of machinery destroying itself. Status report, I said, struggling to my feet through pain that felt like I'd been thrown down a flight of stairs. Catastrophic system failure in progress, Mavira replied, blood streaming from her nose as she tried to read damaged displays. We've lost monitoring for cylinders 7, 11, and 4. Electromagnetic containment is failing faster than our worst-case projections. Look at these readings. We're not approaching cascade failure anymore. We're already in total collapse. Through the shattered observation window, emergency lighting was activating throughout the generation chamber as primary power fluctuated under electromagnetic interference. The 3 stop cylinders were surrounded by crackling barriers of uncontrolled energy that made the air itself look dangerous. Drace struggled to his communication headset, but static filled the control room as electromagnetic interference disrupted all electronic systems. Fragmented voices came through. Can't reach, static. 17 people still, more static. Children crying, please respond. Communications are down, he reported grimly. We've lost contact with all residential blocks. Emergency services, building supervisors, evacuation coordinators, everything. I stared at the chamber access controls, their soft green glow somehow still functional despite the chaos around us. The keypad waited for my authorization to unlock what would very likely be my death sentence. Through the shattered observation window, I could see the 9 remaining cylinders grinding through their irregular rotations, electromagnetic arcs dancing between their housings like deadly aurora. How long until complete containment collapse? I asked Ivorus. They consulted their cracked tablet, its display flickering but still showing cascade failure projections. Based on current deterioration rates, 8 minutes until total electromagnetic field failure. After that, the gravitational shockwave propagates through bedrock in all directions. Everything within 5 kilometers gets torn apart at the molecular level. 8 minutes. 50,000 people above us, children floating against ceilings while parents stood helplessly below, 17 people hanging in a failing elevator, and an entire section of the city about to be erased from existence by runaway gravitational forces. Mavira, what's your timing estimate for the next inversions? She checked her remaining functional displays, hands shaking as she tried to extract patterns from increasingly chaotic data. The cascade failure is accelerating everything. Based on electromagnetic interference patterns, maybe 90 seconds until the next inversion, then 45 seconds after that, then maybe 20 seconds between events. Decreasing intervals, I said, the mathematical reality crushing any remaining hope. Which means if I go in there now, I'll be caught in the chamber during multiple inversions with no time between them to work or escape. Don't do it, Drace said, his voice carrying both command authority and desperate pleading. Avon, I'm ordering you not to enter that chamber. We'll find another solution. What solution? I snapped, frustration and fear making my voice harsh. The containment systems are failing, communications are down, and we've got 90 seconds before the next gravity inversion throws those trapped people around like toys. What exactly is your alternative plan? He didn't answer because there wasn't an answer. We'd reached the point where all the safe options had been eliminated, leaving only degrees of catastrophe to choose from. Through the broken observation window, I watched sparks cascade from cylinder, for as its electromagnetic housing developed visible cracks. Each spark represented thousands of people above us getting closer to death, whether from gravitational shear forces or building collapse, or simply being thrown against concrete ceilings with lethal impact. I have to try, I said, entering the first digit of my authorization code. Even if the timing is impossible, even if I can't complete the full procedure, maybe I can at least prevent total containment collapse. By time for evacuation. Avon. Mavira grabbed my arm, her grip tight with desperate strength. The manual dampening procedure takes 3 minutes under ideal conditions. The inversions are coming every 90 seconds now. Even if you time it perfectly, even if you start the instant an inversion ends. I'll be caught halfway through when the next one starts, I finished. I know the mathematics, but doing nothing guarantees 50,000 deaths. Trying this gives us a chance, even if it's a small one. I entered my full authorization code. The chamber access door began its slow, mechanical opening sequence. 30 seconds that couldn't be rushed or interrupted once started, giving me time to contemplate what I was about to attempt. Wait, Ivorus said suddenly, their voice cutting through the despair with a note of desperate inspiration. There might be another option. The dampening procedure requires adjusting 12 harmonic fields in sequence to prevent interference. But what if we don't worry about interference? What if we adjust all 12 simultaneously? That's not how it works, I replied, watching the access door continue its ponderous opening. 20 seconds left. Simultaneous harmonic adjustment could create feedback loops that make the cascade failure exponentially worse. Or it could create constructive interference that dampens the resonance immediately, they countered with growing excitement. Instead of a 3-minute procedure, it becomes a 30-second procedure. Fast enough to complete between inversions. 15 seconds until the door finished opening. That's completely theoretical, Mavira protested. We've never tested simultaneous harmonic adjustment. The feedback could destabilize the remaining functional cylinders and trigger immediate total collapse. The functional cylinders are already destabilizing, I pointed out, gesturing toward the observation window where cylinder 9 was beginning to wobble visibly on its axis. Look at them. We're minutes away from total collapse anyway. 10 seconds. If simultaneous adjustment works, it saves everyone, I said, the mathematics of desperate gambles crystallizing in my mind. If it doesn't work, we trigger immediate collapse instead of waiting 8 minutes. But at least the people above us don't have time to suffer through multiple devastating inversions first. 5 seconds. The chamber access door completed its opening sequence with a soft pneumatic hiss that sounded like a death knell. Beyond the threshold lay 50 meters of metal walkway, leading to the central control platform, surrounded by 12 massive cylinders that were slowly tearing themselves apart with conflicting gravitational forces. I stepped through the doorway and immediately felt the disorienting sensation of multiple gravity fields pulling at my body from different directions. It was like being gently stretched in 12 directions at once. Not painful yet, but fundamentally wrong in a way that made every cell in my body scream protest. Avon, get back here. Drace's voice echoed through the chamber's communication system with desperate authority. That's a direct order. I kept walking toward the central control platform, fighting the nauseating sensation of gravity that couldn't decide which direction it preferred. Around me, electromagnetic arcs from failing containment systems painted everything in shifting blue light, and the grinding sound of damaged machinery filled the air with mechanical agony. 60 seconds until the next inversion. Mavira's voice crackled through the comm system. Avon, please, get out of there while you still can. I reached the central control platform and stared at the manual harmonic adjustment controls. 12 separate electromagnetic field regulators, each one controlling a massive gravitational generation cylinder. According to every safety protocol I'd ever learned, these were supposed to be adjusted one at a time in careful sequence to prevent harmonic interference. But safety protocols assumed I had time and stable conditions. I placed both hands on the controls, fingers positioned to adjust all 12 harmonic fields simultaneously. Avon, what are you doing? Ivers's voice carried desperate panic. Simultaneous adjustment was just theoretical speculation. We have no idea what will actually happen. Then I guess we're about to conduct the ultimate field test, I replied, and began adjusting all 12 harmonic fields at once. The immediate result was chaos that surpassed every worst-case scenario. Every cylinder in the chamber began changing rotation speed simultaneously, creating a cacophony of grinding metal and electromagnetic discharge that made previous sounds seem quiet by comparison. The gravity fields around me became completely erratic. I felt myself being pulled toward 3 different cylinders at once while something else tried to push me sideways and upward simultaneously. But something unexpected was happening within the chaos. The irregular, destructive patterns of the failing containment systems were beginning to find new equilibrium points as the 12 electromagnetic fields sought harmonic balance. The visible distortions in the chamber atmosphere started organizing into geometric patterns instead of random turbulence, and the grinding sound began shifting from mechanical death throes towards something resembling synchronized operation. The resonance patterns are stabilizing, I called out, making fine adjustments to the harmonic controls as gravitational fields began resonating constructively instead of destructively. The cascade is dampening. The system is finding new equilibrium. Avon, get out of there immediately. Mavira's voice was frantic with urgency. 20 seconds until the next inversion. I made final harmonic adjustments, watching as the last visible electromagnetic arcs faded from the cylinder housings. The chamber fell quiet except for a steady, synchronized hum that sounded like proper gravitational generation operation, but somehow different from the original baseline patterns. 15 seconds. I ran for the chamber exit, but 50 meters of metal walkway, while fighting residual gravitational effects, felt like running through thick liquid. My body alternated between feeling heavy and weightless as I passed between different electromagnetic field zones, and my inner ear was completely confused about spatial orientation. 10 seconds. 5 seconds. I dove through the chamber access doorway, just as the 7th inversion began, landing hard on the control room floor as gravity suddenly reversed. But this time was fundamentally different. Instead of the violent snap we'd been experiencing, the gravitational field reversed smoothly and gradually, like water flowing uphill instead of a mechanical system breaking. The inversion lasted only 30 seconds, and when gravity restored, it did so with the same smooth gradualness instead of dropping everything simultaneously. Harmonic cascade terminated, Mavira reported, her voice filled with amazed relief as she stared at functional displays. All containment systems showing stable operation. Gravitational field coherence restored to new stable parameters. Through the observation window, I could see all 12 cylinders rotating in perfect synchronization, their electromagnetic field stable, and their containment housings no longer throwing dangerous energy discharges. Emergency lighting had switched back to normal operation, and the grinding mechanical sounds had been replaced by the steady hum of functioning systems. Drace was already coordinating through his restored headset. All units, this is sector operations. Gravitational anomaly has been resolved. Initiate standard rescue procedures for trapped individuals. Gravity is now stable and predictable. Relief flooded through me as I heard building supervisors reporting successful rescues. The 17 people trapped in the elevator were being extracted safely. Children who had been floating against ceilings were back in their parents' arms. The immediate crisis was over, but something in Ivers's expression made my relief evaporate. They were staring at their tablet with growing alarm instead of celebration. "What is it?" I asked, dread returning. "The harmonic dampening worked perfectly," they said slowly. "The cascade failure has been stopped. All generation systems are operating within normal parameters, and gravitational fields are completely stable." "That sounds like unqualified success. Why do you look terrified?" "Because the electromagnetic signature is fundamentally different from original specifications." They showed me the display. The simultaneous harmonic adjustment didn't restore the system to baseline. It reset everything to an entirely new operational state. I studied the readings, trying to understand the implications. Gravitational output was within acceptable ranges. All safety systems showed green status, and cylinder synchronization was mathematically perfect. But the underlying electromagnetic field patterns were subtly, yet completely different from the design parameters the system had operated under for 3 years. Different how? What are the safety implications? "I don't know," Ivers admitted, their voice carrying the weight of new uncertainty. "The system is working flawlessly, gravity is stable, people are safe, all emergency situations are resolved. But we've essentially performed an uncontrolled experiment on a gravitational generation network that affects 50,000 people. We have no way of predicting what these new electromagnetic patterns might cause over time." Through the facility's restored communication system, we could hear the relief and gratitude in voices from the residential sectors. Parents thanking emergency responders, building supervisors reporting successful evacuations, maintenance crews confirming that structural damage was reparable. The immediate human crisis was completely resolved. But as I looked at electromagnetic readings showing stable but fundamentally altered gravitational field patterns, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the control room. We had stopped the disaster. We had saved 50,000 lives. The system was working better than it ever had before, with perfect stability and no signs of potential failure. And none of us had any idea what we'd actually done or what it might mean for the future. The taste of metal lingered in my mouth, but I couldn't tell if it was residual electromagnetic interference or the first warning sign of whatever came next. 3 hours after the last gravitational inversion, I stood in the restored control room, watching displays that should have made me feel victorious. Every system showed green. Every safety parameter was within acceptable ranges. The synchronized hum of 12 perfectly operating generation cylinders provided a steady soundtrack of technological success. So why did the metallic taste refuse to leave my mouth? "Final damage assessment coming in," Mavira reported. her voice carrying exhausted relief as she compiled reports from across the residential sectors. 17 people successfully extracted from the elevator, minor injuries only. All children safely returned to floor level. Structural damage is cosmetic except for 3 support beam stress fractures that are already being reinforced. Through the repaired observation window, I watched the generation cylinders maintain their flawless synchronization. The electromagnetic fields that had been tearing themselves apart 6 hours ago now operated with mathematical precision that exceeded original design specifications. The chaotic arcs and grinding mechanical death sounds had been replaced by steady, harmonious operation that our instruments confirmed was more stable than the system had ever been. Communication restored with all residential blocks. Drace announced from his coordination station, medical gauze covering the head wound he'd sustained during the inversions. Emergency services report 0 casualties. Property damage is minimal. All evacuation protocols have been canceled. I should have felt triumph. We had identified the crisis, survived the technical challenges, prevented catastrophic failure, and saved 50,000 lives without losing a single person. By every measurable standard, we had achieved complete success. Instead, I found myself staring at harmonic resonance patterns that made my skin crawl with unease. Inverts, I called out, watching them obsessively cross-reference electromagnetic readings with their tablet calculations. Give me your honest assessment of current system status. They looked up from their work with eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. All operational parameters are within acceptable ranges. Gravitational field coherence is mathematically perfect. Electromagnetic containment is more stable than design specifications require. Cylinder synchronization shows 0 deviation from optimal performance. That doesn't answer my question. Because I can't answer your question, they replied with frustrated honesty. The simultaneous harmonic adjustment worked beyond our wildest expectations, but it fundamentally altered the system's base operational state. We're no longer running gravity generation according to 3 years of tested protocols. We're running an entirely new electromagnetic configuration that we've never studied, never modeled, and never stress-tested. Mavira joined our conversation, bringing display readings that confirmed Iver's concerns. Look at these field pattern analyses. The underlying electromagnetic signatures are completely different from original baseline. Same gravitational output, same safety margins, same operational efficiency, but achieved through quantum field interactions that don't match our design documentation. I studied the data, feeling cold unease settle deeper in my chest. The mathematics of success were undeniable. Stable gravity, 0 casualties, functional infrastructure, grateful residents. But the mathematics of uncertainty were equally undeniable. Unknown electromagnetic field interactions, untested long-term stability, and 50,000 people depending on a system we no longer fully understood. What's our monitoring capability for detecting potential problems with the new configuration? I asked. That's the issue, Mavira said grimly. Our sensors were calibrated for the original electromagnetic patterns. They can confirm that current operations are stable and safe, but they might not recognize warning signs specific to the new field configuration. We could have early indicators of future problems that our instruments simply can't interpret. The facility's communication system crackled with another status report that should have been reassuring. Sector operations, this is Building Supervisor Martinez in Block 7. All residents accounted for and safe. I wanted to personally thank your team. The gravitational stability over the past 3 hours has been absolutely perfect. Better than it's ever been, actually. Whatever you did down there, the people up here are grateful. 50,000 people living their normal lives above us. Children playing safely on floors instead of floating against ceilings. Parents going to work confident that fundamental physics would behave predictably. All of them trusting that the steady hum beneath their feet represented reliable, comprehensible technology. None of them knowing that we'd essentially performed uncontrolled experimental surgery on the system, keeping them alive. Drace, I said, watching him coordinate final cleanup operations with emergency services. What are our reporting requirements to corporate management? Do we file this as a successful emergency response, or do we classify it as an unauthorized system modification? He paused in his coordination efforts, the question forcing him to confront implications we'd all been avoiding. Standard protocol would require immediate notification to corporate engineering that we've altered system operation beyond design specifications. They'd want full technical documentation, risk assessment studies, and probably immediate system replacement, which would mean shutting down gravitational generation for this entire sector while they install new equipment, Ivers pointed out. Weeks or months of evacuation for 50,000 people, while corporate engineers study what we did and decide whether it's acceptable. Through our restored communications, we could hear the ordinary sounds of a community returning to normal. Maintenance crews discussing repair schedules, parents calling children in for dinner, building supervisors planning routine operations. The sounds of people who trusted that their world would remain stable and predictable. The current configuration is working flawlessly, I said, articulating the dilemma we all understood. People are safe, systems are stable, and performance exceeds design specifications. But we have no long-term data on what these new electromagnetic patterns might cause months or years from now. The metallic taste intensified as I spoke, and I caught Mavira wincing slightly as she adjusted her console position. The lingering electromagnetic effects were subtle but persistent, nothing dangerous, nothing that interfered with system operation, but a constant reminder that we were now operating in uncharted territory. "Look at Cylinder 7, Ivers said quietly, pointing through the observation window. I followed their gaze and saw what they meant. The massive generation cylinder was rotating with perfect mechanical precision, its electromagnetic housing showing optimal field coherence, its gravitational output exactly matching requirements. But there was something in its movement that seemed almost organic, too smooth, too perfectly synchronized, like it was responding to something beyond mere mechanical programming. The harmonics are self-adjusting, I realized, watching subtle variations in rotation speed that seemed to anticipate field fluctuations before they occurred. The simultaneous adjustment didn't just reset the system, it created feedback loops that allow real-time optimization. Which means the system is now learning, Mavira said, her voice carrying equal parts amazement and dread. Each minor variation in load or external conditions triggers automatic harmonic adjustments that improve overall stability. It's becoming more efficient over time. I stared at the cylinders with growing unease. A system that optimized itself based on changing conditions was theoretically ideal, but only if you understood the parameters it was optimizing for and the methods it used to achieve optimization. We understood neither. How long until we can be confident in the system's long-term stability? I asked. Conservative estimate? 6 months of continuous monitoring to establish baseline patterns for the new configuration, Ivers replied. 12 months to identify potential failure modes. 24 months to develop comprehensive safety protocols. 2 years of uncertainty. 2 years of watching a system that worked flawlessly while never being entirely sure what it might do next. 2 years of 50,000 people living above us, trusting technology that we'd accidentally transformed into something beyond our complete understanding. Drace finished his final coordination calls and joined our discussion with the weariness of someone who'd been making impossible decisions all day. Corporate management is requesting a preliminary status report. How do we classify today's events? The question hung in the air like the metallic taste that refused to fade. We could file a standard emergency response report emphasizing the successful resolution and saved lives. We could classify it as routine maintenance that restored normal operation. We could present the mathematical evidence that current performance exceeded all safety requirements. Or we could document that we'd fundamentally altered a system affecting 50,000 people using untested procedures during a crisis situation, creating unknown long-term risks that might not manifest for months or years. The system is working, I said finally. People are safe, operations are stable, and all measurable parameters indicate successful resolution of the gravitational anomaly crisis. But we don't know what we've actually created, Mavira added quietly. No, I agreed. We don't. Through the facility's communication system, the sounds of normal life continued. Children's laughter echoing from residential blocks, maintenance crews discussing routine repairs, building supervisors planning tomorrow's operations. The sounds of a community that trusted the ground beneath their feet to remain solid and predictable. I looked at the perfectly synchronized cylinders, their self-optimizing harmonic patterns, their electromagnetic signatures that matched no documentation in our technical manuals. Then I looked at my colleagues, people who'd helped save 50,000 lives through desperate improvisation and theoretical procedures that shouldn't have worked as well as they did. We monitor everything, I decided. Every electromagnetic fluctuation, every harmonic variation, every optimization adjustment. We document baseline parameters for the new configuration and establish warning protocols for patterns we don't recognize. And we keep the people above us safe while we figure out exactly what we've built. Inverts nodded slowly. Continuous monitoring with parameters we're developing as we go. Emergency protocols for situations we can't yet predict, Mavira added. And daily operational decisions based on technology that exceeds our complete understanding, Drace concluded. The metallic taste finally began to fade, but I suspected it would return whenever the system made one of its self-optimizing adjustments. A permanent reminder that we were now responsible for managing something that had grown beyond our original expertise. 3 weeks later, I stood in the same control room reading reports that confirmed our growing unease. The system continued to operate flawlessly. In fact, performance had improved measurably as the self-optimizing algorithms refined their harmonic patterns. Gravitational stability exceeded original specifications. Energy efficiency was 15% better than design parameters. Mechanical wear rates had actually decreased as the cylinders found more optimal synchronization patterns. Every quantifiable measure indicated unprecedented success. But Inverts had begun documenting electromagnetic phenomena that didn't match any known physics. Mavira's instruments occasionally recorded gravitational field fluctuations that lasted microseconds and seemed to violate conservation of energy principles. And I'd started noticing that the system's self-optimization adjustments sometimes preceded external changes rather than responding to them, as if it was somehow anticipating shifts in load distribution or atmospheric conditions. Monthly performance report is ready for corporate submission, Drace announced, reviewing data that painted a picture of technological triumph. 0 incidents, optimal performance across all metrics, complete resident satisfaction, and operational costs under budget. And the anomalous readings? I asked. Classified as instrumentation recalibration requirements, he replied, which is technically accurate. Our instruments were designed for the original system configuration. The fact that they occasionally register impossible readings when monitoring the new configuration suggests equipment limitations rather than safety concerns. It was a reasonable interpretation of inconclusive data. Corporate management would read reports showing that Sector 12's gravitational generation facility was operating at unprecedented efficiency with perfect safety records. They would congratulate us for successfully managing a crisis and maintaining optimal service to residents. They would never know that we were now responsible for technology that occasionally seemed to bend fundamental physics in ways we couldn't explain or predict. The steady hum of 12 perfectly synchronized cylinders continued in the background, a sound that had become so familiar I barely noticed it anymore. But sometimes, late at night when the facility was quiet, I thought I could hear subtle variations in that hum, patterns that suggested the system was adjusting itself for reasons that had nothing to do with gravitational generation requirements. 50,000 people lived safely above us, their feet planted firmly on solid floors, their children playing without floating against ceilings, their trust in basic physics completely justified by day-to-day experience. They had no reason to worry about the technology that maintained their stable world. And perhaps that was exactly as it should be. The metallic taste had never completely disappeared. During the system's optimization cycles, it returned like a familiar warning that we were managing forces we hadn't fully mastered. But the children above us continued laughing, parents continued working, and life continued with the stability and predictability that 50,000 people deserved. We had saved everyone. The system worked flawlessly. Performance exceeded all expectations, and none of us slept quite as soundly as we had before we learned that success could be more unsettling than failure. Outside the facility, snow fell in perfectly ordinary patterns, following gravitational fields that behaved exactly as physics textbooks predicted. But in the generation chamber below, 12 massive cylinders continued their synchronized rotation with mechanical precision that occasionally seemed just a little too perfect, a little too responsive, a little too intelligent for simple electromagnetic machinery. The emergency alert had promised no casualties yet, and we had kept that promise completely. But the word yet lingered in our minds like the taste of metal, a reminder that some victories create their own uncertainties, and some solutions generate questions that might take years to answer. We had prevented disaster, saved lives, and created something that worked better than anyone had imagined possible. Whether we had solved our problems or simply transformed them into different problems remained to be seen.